Adrian Reynolds, you are going to be taking over as Training Director for the FIEC in Easter 2017. Be great to hear your reflections, first of all, on strengths and weaknesses at the moment as you look out on the independent church and its training.
Well, they kind of come from a slightly narrow standpoint. I'm in one particular church at the moment, and one of the things I'm looking forward to is getting more experience of our family of churches. But certainly from where I'm standing and my experience at PT, I can see there are some really good strengths and also some weaknesses about training within independency. I guess some of the strengths are that we are clear that there's no one size fits all. And we've often been clear on that, we've long been clear on that. I think that's a really good strength. So we're not trying to shoehorn people into a kind of, you must train this way, or the powers that be say you must train this way. I think that's a real opportunity for us, and probably one we can make more of. And indeed, some of the ways that colleges are responding to training pressures and monetary pressures do allow us to have a bit more variation in how we train people. So I'd like to see more of that, really, a little bit, and I think that's a real strength of independency. I think the other thing to say about independency is also an inherent weakness in that we have to be disciplined and careful about how we relate to one another as churches. And we haven't always got that right, have we? So very often people think fellowship means that the larger churches just give the smaller churches money, or that the larger churches somehow dictate terms to the smaller churches. We've got to really work through what fellowship means and how we relate to one another. So we are independent, but there is also an element in which we are interdependent. And quite how that reflects upon training is probably one of the less developed parts of our ecclesiology. I'd like to see more work on that and to think about actually what that means for training guys and women too for appropriate roles in ministry.
Thank you. What about your hopes for training within FIEC? As you say, it's early days, but tell us a little bit about the kind of areas you'd like to see us growing in and improving on.
I think I'd like to see a bit more breadth and a bit more depth. I'm speaking personally about my own life, but about those I know as well. I think in terms of breadth, I'd like to see us training different kinds of people better. I think much of our training is focused on the lead minister very often, or a particular kind of worker, a youth worker or a women's worker. And that, of course, is very important. But I'd like to see that broadened to think about how we train lay leaders, those kind of people who are in full-time work, but also serving as leaders in churches. They're critical to our churches. They're a key part of how our churches are structured. We believe in that kind of leadership, plural leadership. And yet we don't really invest in training in those guys, even though there's quite a heavy burden of leadership upon them. So I'd like to see more work there. I think I'd also like to see a bit more breadth in terms of the subjects we tackle. We tend to focus, and I can understand why this is, we tend to focus on gifting. And perhaps within independency, we're reacting against a previous generation where very little time was given to gifting. And so we spend a lot of time on sort of doctrinal subjects and on preaching and pastoral matters. I think that's really excellent. We don't want to lose that. But at the same time, it's important that we do some focus on godliness as well. It's essential for the church that we have leaders who are both gifted and godly. And we've got to keep those two things in mind. I think probably there's been a disproportionate balance of time given towards gifting, and maybe we need a bit more time on godliness as well. And maybe those two are delivered in different ways through different people, I don't know, but those are both essential to ministry. So we need that kind of breadth, and yet at the same time digging down more deeply, I think. We do need leaders of churches who are as deeply embedded in the scriptures, have a deep personal knowledge of the Lord Jesus and a close walk with him. And so we mustn't put up with a kind of shallow, superficial kind of training. We need depth in training alongside the breadth. I realise that's a tall order. You can't have everything. We can't send people off to seminary for 10 years or whatever it is. And so there's got to be a balance that's struck. And yet we have got to strive for depth and breadth, I think.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I mean, one thing that strikes me is how when we're training the people who do get sent to college or further training, that we are training them themselves to be trainers and to be lifelong learners. That's something else you've talked a little bit about. It'd be great to hear your thoughts on how a pastor in ministry can be going on learning themselves and starting to think about training others in the church.
I think there's different ways that you can go on learning. There are lots of different learning kind of methods. For example, going on a conference can be very useful, but also being in small groups with people, having those who can challenge you, both perhaps outside the church, ministry friends, but also those inside the church, having that kind of culture, I think is key. There's a sort of, we sometimes put ministers on a pedestal, don't we, and sort of say, you know, once they've made it. I remember once I had finished my training, someone saying to me, I shall never give you any more feedback on a sermon, now you're officially the pastor of a church. I thought that's preposterous. That's exactly the kind of thing I need. I need to be kept sharp. And obviously we need to get the right balance in that. But there needs to be this culture where not only do we go out looking for opportunities to keep on learning, but we ourselves have an attitude where we're ready to be challenged, ready to be critiqued, ready to be helped and encouraged. And I sense perhaps ministry pride often gets in the way of that. It's very easy when you're standing at the front all the time to be vain, certainly proud often. And I think what we therefore need is a culture really of humility amongst those in ministry that says, yes, I'm willing to carry on learning, I am willing to carry on growing, and I'm willing to let people minister to me. That's the thing that seems to me to be often missing from those in ministry.
Thank you. And what do you think, as I listened to you just then, you're talking about the value of conferences, accountability groups, and so on. I guess those are the kind of things that lots of different gospel workers would be looking to. What particularly do you think the FIEC can offer? What is it that, how can we support FIEC pastors and other people involved in ministry in FIEC churches in particular?
And the great thing about being in a family of churches like the FIEC is when you've signed up for it, and when you've signed something like, for example, the Pastors Network, you've made a commitment, and other people have therefore made a commitment to you. It's not unlike church membership in a church setting. There is a sense in which there is a family to fall back on. I find it personally very difficult taking critique and very difficult sort of taking rebuke from others. But I think if you know that people are for you and they've effectively signed up to be for you and to be together in a family, I think that's really helpful. It means actually that we can flourish in those sorts of settings. That's not to say those things can't happen in other places, of course they can. But I think what the key benefit to me, it seems, of being in the FIEC is having something to fall back on, a family to fall back on, a network that we've committed to and we've bought into, that actually says, you know, when things are tough or when I need some help in whatever reason, I can count on this person just as they can count on me. So it's about give and take, actually, that we need to be willing to serve others as well as be served ourselves.